Hi class, Mrs. Calvi here. I'm going to be doing review on integers. Now yesterday's lesson was about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing integers. We're just going to review other skills with integers today. So if you remember, we did a lesson during the year about identifying whether an integer is positive or negative. So for example, here we have, it says name a positive or negative integer or positive or negative number to represent each situation. So here it says a gain of 20 yards in football. Well, if you're gaining 20 yards, that's going to be a positive. So that would be represented by positive 20. Okay. B is saying you're spending $75. Well, if you're spending $75, you're giving away $75. So that would be represented by a negative 75. And C here says 10 feet below sea level. Well, sea level is going to be 0. And if you are below sea level, that means you would be negative. So if it's 10 feet below sea level, that would be a negative 10. If you were 8 feet above sea level, that would be a positive 8. Okay, so that's pretty simple. We also talked about absolute value. All right, so we're going to go over that as well. So absolute value is just telling us the distance a number is from 0 on the number line. So the absolute value bars, that's here, right here. You've learned that in class. So you would say this as the absolute value of negative 3. You would read this as saying the absolute value of 3. So remember, the absolute value is the distance from 0 on a number line. Well, if you think about it, negative 3, how far is that from 0 on a number line? So if you were to count the hops, 1, 2, 3. So it's 3 units, or a distance of 3 from 0. So the one thing, if you remember, absolute value is never negative. It's always going to be a positive number. Well, let's see how far the number 3 is from 0. So we're at positive 3. How far is that from 0? 1, 2, 3 units from 0. So the absolute value of negative 3 is equal to 3. And the absolute value of 3 is equal to 3. Remember, absolute value can never be negative. Okay, so let's practice a couple of problems here. So let's say I wanted to know the absolute value of negative 6. Who can tell me what that would equal? My pen's not working, hold on. Okay, so the absolute value of negative 6, that would be equal to, so that means how many units is negative 6 away from 0 on the number line? So if I were to actually have a number line here, and I have 0 in the middle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. To save time, I'm not writing all the numbers. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6. So if I were to actually see the distance negative 6 is to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that means the absolute value of negative 6 is equal to 6. All right, so if we wanted to know what the absolute value of 6 was, not negative 6, just 6, we would go to our positive 6 and count how many units it is to get to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the absolute value of 6 is 6. And we know that they have to be positive because absolute value has to be positive. All right, so let's practice a few more problems. Okay, so let's say I have what is here. It says I deposit $30 into a bank account. So if I'm depositing money, that means I am putting money into my bank account. All right, so some of you might think, oh, well, I'm taking money away from me. No, it's going into your bank account. So you are putting money into your bank account. Would that be a positive 30 or would that be a negative 30? That would be represented by a positive 30. All right. Now, if I had these numbers here, I have a 4, a positive 4, a negative 8, a negative 16, and 25. If I wanted for you to tell me what the opposite of these are, you would need to be able to do that. So the opposite of a positive 4 is going to be a negative 4. The opposite of a negative 8 is going to be positive 8. The opposite of negative 16 is positive 16. And the opposite of 25 is negative 25. Okay? So we've talked about absolute value. We've talked about how a number is represented, whether it's positive or negative. And we've also talked about the opposite of a number. All right. So we're going to be talking about one more thing, and that's going to be comparing our integers. Okay, so now we are going to be comparing numbers or integers. So we are going to be using the less than sign, the greater than sign, or the equal to sign. So when we are looking at numbers that are both positive, it's pretty simple. You know that 2 is less than 4. That's pretty simple. You guys know that the alligator's mouth wants to eat the larger number. All right. Also, when 1 is positive and 1 is negative, that's pretty simple. You know that positive numbers are larger than negative numbers. So in this case, when I'm comparing negative 6 to positive 3, I know that negative 6 is less than positive 3. All right. Those are the simple ones. So you have to remember now, I have a negative 3 and a negative 5. In class, I would always tell you, the larger the negative, the smaller the value. Okay, the larger the negative, the smaller the value. So when I'm comparing two negative numbers, I want the tiny small point of my inequality symbol to point to the larger negative. So then that means negative 3 is greater than negative 5. The larger the negative, the smaller the value. The tiny little point is going to point to the larger negative number. Okay, and if you think about it, if you look at a number line, right, think about the number line above my board in class. These are all negative to the left, and you guys know that the further left we go, the smaller the number, right? So that means the larger the negative, the smaller the number. So if we're comparing negative 12 and negative 4, the larger the number, the larger the negative, the smaller the number. So the larger negative is the negative 12. So my little tiny point is going to point to that negative 12. So negative 12 is less than negative 4. You have to also think about it as the closer you get to 0, the larger the number. So you can look at it that way. But I always taught you, I used to repeat myself all the time, the larger the negative, the smaller the value. All right. And then also when we are comparing integers, putting them in order from least to greatest, you're going to need to know to do that as well. So let's try one of those. Okay, so now if I wanted to put these numbers in order, and let's say my order is least to greatest, okay? So remember, the larger the negative, the smaller the value. So my smallest number out of my set here, I have a negative 2, a 0, a 2, and a negative 5. So the larger the negative, the smaller the value. So my negative 5 is going to be my smallest number. Then it's going to be negative 2. Then it's going to be 0, and then 2. So think about it. From least to greatest, if you were looking at a number line, envision that number line above my board again, I would see the larger negatives to the left, zeros in the middle, and then I'm working my way up to my positives. So this is how it would be if it were from least to greatest. Now, if the direction said from greatest to least, now this is where you have to be careful. Make sure you're reading directions carefully. So from greatest to least, it would be a positive 2, a 0, a negative 2, and a negative 5. Okay? The negative numbers are the hardest just to remember. All right? So the larger the negative, the smaller the value. Just keep repeating that to yourself, and it just will become second nature pretty soon that you'll be able to do this. Okay? So these are the items that are going to be on today's Do Now. Remember, once you submit your Do Now, you cannot make changes, so make sure you are double and triple checking your work before you hit submit. If you have any questions, make sure you do message me. Okay, I will talk to you soon.